Hello, my name is Daniel.
Daniel, go ahead, sir.
And just by the way, I appreciate everything that you've done, and the Lord has mightily used you in my life. Just wanted to say that and appreciate everything that you've done and taught. My question has to do with something that I heard Bart Ehrman say in a debate with Dan Wallace. It was a debate that I was recently watching about textual criticism. And Bart Ehrman raised up this question, and it sort of, well, I was wondering what your response to it would be. So my question's about textual criticism. Bart Ehrman said that obviously through textual, this is what Bart Ehrman said, through textual criticism, as we compare the thousands of manuscripts we have, we can construct an initial text, not necessarily the original text, because there is a gap between the original writings and this reconstructed text. So according to Bart Ehrman, he said that, well, technically we can reconstruct an initial text, but there's no way that we can know if that initial text was corrupted because we have that gap.
What's the gap he's talking about?
I think he's talking about the gap. So it's based on the assumption that the earliest manuscripts we have are from the 2nd century.
Well, he knows that's not true. I mean, even he admits the creed from 1 Corinthians 15:3 goes all the way back to within months or at least a couple of years of the crucifixion. So, and Gary Habermas has written about this extensively. He's probably the top guy in the world on the resurrection right now. He's writing a 4-volume magnum opus, Gary Habermas. And his first volume just came out. It's about 1,100 pages. It's all on the evidence for the resurrection. So Bart Ehrman talks a good game to the general public, but to the academic world, his arguments don't work and he knows it. Okay? In fact, he wrote a book called Misquoting Jesus, you may be familiar with, in about 2005, where he tried to say that we really can't trust the New Testament documents because we have these variants, right? The same year he wrote that book, he also updated a book that he originally wrote with the top manuscript scholar of the last century, Bruce Metzger from Princeton University. And Bruce Metzger, was Bart Ehrman's mentor when he went to Princeton. And in the text of the New Testament book, an academic book, Ehrman admits we know what the New Testament, the original New Testament, really said. And then in the 2nd edition of Misquoting Jesus, he's interviewed, and here's what he says in the interview that you can get in the 2nd edition of Misquoting Jesus. He says, Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him, and even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. Check this out. He said, if he and I were put into a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement. Maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. The position I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. You see that last line? That defeats the entire thesis of the popular level work, Misquoting Jesus. Why you're writing the book then? This book ought to be called Misquoting Ehrman because it doesn't even believe his own book. Remember, this is an interview that was put in the appendix of the 2nd edition. Now, with regard to gaps prior to the writings, there's been 2 books written, full-length books written on the dating of the New Testament. One was by Bishop John Robinson, and he was not a conservative, he was a liberal, back maybe 50 years ago. Another book written a couple years ago, I want to say it's Jonathan Bernier, I might not have that name right, redating the text of the New Testament. Both of those books, which are the only 2 works in recent times on the dating of the New Testament, both those books date most, if not all, the documents of the New Testament prior to 70 AD. And we do the same, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And they have reasons for that. Okay? So there's no gap. There's no big gap. It's certainly not the 2nd century.
I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Daniel.
Coming up next, discover why the Bible and the New Testament remain uncorrupted and trustworthy.
That question is, why do you choose to believe the Bible? That's the question. We must be able to answer that question in our culture today. It's a legitimate question that deserves a legitimate answer. But you see, because of anti-intellectualism, we hear that question, and usually we'll say something like, well, I believe the Bible because I was raised like that. Well, bless your spirit if that's your answer. But please, don't go out of here and say that to anybody. I beg you, please don't do that, because that is not a reasoned response. I was raised that way just doesn't cut it. Or sometimes, because we live in this culture of experientialism, sometimes because of this postmodern culture where what's true for you was not necessarily true for me, and the experience is king, there is another answer with which we have become accustomed that we think is a great answer to the question, and it goes something like this. Why do you choose to believe the Bible? Well, I choose to believe the Bible because I tried it and it worked for me. We say that and then we sort of back up a couple of steps, kind of let the answer sit there. Like we really just did something. What you did was open a logical hole big enough to drive a Mack truck through. That's what you did. Let me give you an answer to that question that I believe is better than I was raised that way. Or it's better than, well, I'm Southern Baptist and that's the way we believe. Or it's better than I tried it and it works for me. I want to tell you why I choose to believe the Bible. Because I don't believe the Bible because I was raised that way, because I wasn't. I don't choose to believe the Bible because I tried it and it worked for me. My mother's Buddhism worked for her. That's why she was a Buddhist. Now, I need something more than just because it works. Here's the answer. I'll give it to you and I'll unpack it for you. I choose to believe the Bible because it's a reliable collection of historical documents written down by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses. They report to us supernatural events that took place in fulfillment of specific prophecies and claim that their writings are divine rather than human in origin.
In his book Misquoting Jesus, Bart Ehrman raises concerns about the reliability of the New Testament, arguing that because we don't have the original manuscripts and there are thousands of variations in the copies, we can't fully trust it. However, it's important to put these variations in context. The vast majority are minor, things like spelling differences or changes in word order, and none of them affect core Christian beliefs about Jesus, salvation, or the resurrection. When we look at the number of New Testament manuscripts, in Greek alone, the NT stands out as the best preserved ancient document we have. Compared to other historical writings, like those of Plato or Homer, the New Testament far surpasses them in both the number of copies and how close those copies are to the original writings. This gives scholars confidence that we can reconstruct the New Testament with over % accuracy. As Timothy says, all Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. While human scribes did make copying errors, God's message has remained intact. In fact, having so many manuscripts helps textual critics pinpoint the original wording with a high degree of certainty. So, while Ehrman brings up some real challenges, the overwhelming evidence still supports the reliability of the New Testament. It continues to be trustworthy in conveying the message of Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection.